Thank you guys for being here today. And I know that you've already been diving into guided reading. And now you're going to you have a little bit of experience. Some of these things are going to start to make a little bit more sense as to why you're doing certain things. And we'll make sure that we're doing them correctly so that this assessment gives us the information that we can use and need with our students. So thank you for having printed out those resources, because you'll see they will come in handy as we move along. So this quote from Frederick Douglass is it's important for us, and especially we think, during this time of the year when we're celebrating so many people who've gone before us and contributions that they've made. And we know that in our district, we have more than 2,000 students that are not proficient readers. And our goal is for every reader by third grade, every child a reader. And so we really want to be able to set our kids up for success in the future. And one of the ways to do that is to learn to read and to be proficient at it. So that's our goal. And guided reading is the perfect vehicle to do this. So today our learning intentions are going to be that you're going to understand the resources in your leveling kit and the process of leveling your students. I'm sure some well-intentioned grade level teammate has helped you through the basics and you have a basic idea. But again, like I said, I want you to know the resources that are in your kit, and there's other assessments that you can be using to get information about your students as well. And we're going to know that we have achieved success today when you know where to start to level your students and when you have an instructional reading level for your students. So why guided reading? And this was a graphic that we came up with a few years ago. And when guided reading started to really become the UA model at the elementary level. And what we had noticed is we had many teachers who were doing amazing things in UA, but some were teaching over to this direction and some were teaching over in this direction and taking their kids far, but in different directions. So while kids were getting a good experience and they were learning things, what we found is that through guided reading, through every grade level having that same structure and building on it from year to year, is that actually with the same or less amount of work, we could take the kids farther, because it's that vertical articulation where we're building on the same skills. So this first model, those grade levels were focusing on different areas, which didn't always equal different growth. Some teachers were really good. Other teachers, it wasn't their area of expertise. And so kids didn't grow as much. But with this consistency, we can see the increase in students being able to access complex text. And that's our goal for having this systematic strategy that we use during universal access time. So during our leveling process, what we're trying to do is we use a system developed by Fontes and Pinnell that levels students on with a letter somewhere between A and Z. And in the graph over on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see that there are certain letters that equate to certain grade levels. And we would like our students to be moving through those levels. And as you can see in kinder and first, there's a lot of growth that happens. And then in grades 2, 3, and 4, there's a little bit less growth that happens. That's because things get more complex and they get more difficult. In kindergarten, A level, we're looking to see, can kids, do they know what a cover is and what the back cover is and a spine? And, do they have concepts of print? Do they know that each letter or word has its own way of being said? So it's kind of simpler things compared to what we ask them to do at upper grades. You can see here that these V, W, X, Y, Z, those are really getting into middle school level. And I know that as you've seen this, maybe not in second grade so much, but we oftentimes have kids reading, being leveled at those levels, I should say. And what you will learn in future sessions when we go a little bit more in depth with guided reading is that all of these letter levels are directly related to something called the literacy continuum that Fontes and Pinnell, the guided reading gurus, have put out. And in that literacy continuum, it tells us what kids should be able to do at each level. You probably have those around on your campus. It's maybe about an inch thick book with a black spine and white on the front with a lot of pictures of kids and stuff. Again, as we go in more into guided reading, that's something we'll share with you. But knowing where to instruct a student is important because we want to find that just right fit. We don't want a text to be too hard because then they will be frustrated by it. And we don't want a text to be too easy because then they won't learn enough from it. So we want it to be just right. And that's why leveling is so important, because we're finding that just right place to instruct our students. So what's in your assessment kit? I see that you have your boxes there. And when you look in your book, you can see that you have a teacher's guide and you have 3 different kinds of teachery books with the spirals on the side. You have all those file folders with your cards and your books, and maybe you keep your copies in them. I'm not sure exactly how you manage your supplies at Terra Vista. And you see the assessment conference book, which was Natalie Reyes. That's what was in that one file that you opened. And it's the square book with the hard stock. Do you have that one, Natalie? Yeah, perfect. And then you have your teacher's guide that says assess, decide, and guide. And then your assessment forms and with masters. And if you have an old copy assessment kit, you might even have a CD in there with them. The newer ones don't have it. I think they just assume everybody's going online for things now. In that assessment masters book, there are actually tests in here other than just the reading conferences, other than just leveling. There are reading interest surveys, and there are developmental word knowledge inventories. There are listening comprehension activities. Today, what we're going to talk about is that reading assessment conference where you've been getting your levels on your kids. And the other ones, they're not mandatory things that we need to do, but they are ways that you can find out more about your readers. So the big question is, and especially at the beginning of the year, this one was tricky. Where do I start when I try and level my students? Most years we have some historical data, at least on kids who are returning from the previous year. This year, because we didn't really do much with guided reading last year, a lot of us, we were just kind of stabbing in the dark to try and figure out where to start. Well, there are a couple of ways you can make a little bit more of an educated guess. The first one is in that assessment conference book. And in that book are word lists. Have you guys used the word lists? Okay, yeah, perfect. Okay. And you know that I'm going to just go through my spiel here. And you know that when you start that, you are second grade teachers, and you typically would start them a grade below and let them kind of build their confidence in reading before you're doing that. Another thing that you can do is you can also, through iReady, you can find out what their Lexile level was. And that would give you a ballpark too. Fontes and Pinnell would tell you that Lexile and F&P are not necessarily equal partners, like they don't, but it will at least give you a ballpark of where to start, which might be better than just going, okay, I'm going to try you on an E because that's the beginning of the second grade, when they might already be an L, because that's a lot of tests to give to find out that they're not an E reader, they're actually an L reader. Okay, so just a place to kind of start when we don't know, or when we come back after a vacation time, especially, usually after winter break, you might have gotten new students that are new to the campus. You're like, where do I start? One of these places will give you a ballpark of where you can start your reading record conferences. So if you don't know what their reading level is, I would say start in that small square book with the word lists. And so you're probably familiar with the scoring chart, and that will give you a baseline place. The big deal about those is that they're going to read down and they need to read very fluently. Okay. If you happen to know, because like next year, when you send your kids off to the next grade, you're going to be able to tell them, oh, Noah was reading at an M and Joaquin was reading at an O and Jasmine was reading at a P. You're going to be able to tell next year's teacher that, so that they'll have a place to start. But typically, so when you get your kids from first grade next year, you're going to start one level above the last recorded score. So if they come to you and they're reading at an F, try them at a G, see where they are. We don't want to stretch too far, because we want, from doing this is not a quick, simple assessment necessarily. And so we want to make the most of our time and make it really meaningful and not waste any time when we're doing it. And we want to keep leveling our students up until we find their highest instructional level. And we'll talk a little bit more about how to determine that as we go through. So going back to that where to start word list, the directions are on your teacher page, which look like this, and for each one. And so you can either run copies of this page for the kids, or you can just give them the book to read. You don't need to necessarily make a copy, but they're going to read the words going down the list, not across. That's really important, because the words get harder as you go down. And once they need to read the words quickly and automatically. And any words that they had to sound out, like invite, you would mark that with an SO, sounded out. And that's actually considered an error. They need to just be automatic with these. If they miss 3 words in a row, stop the test and record the number of words they read correctly. And as you've seen on your teacher chart, it will tell you up in the corner how, if they read so many words correctly, we'll then start leveling them. Let's say they read 15 words. It would tell you to start leveling them at an O. And then that would give you a place to start. Okay. Questions so far? I'm just kind of going here. All right, you guys, it seemed like you had done this before. Now, when you're doing the recording, the reading record, there are many things on this form, and some of them you've probably figured out by doing a few, but others you might not really necessarily understand the purpose for them. So I have them circled and marked and animated on the slide, but you could also look at either Sean, the level M, or the level R one that you have if you wanted to see it a little more up close and personal. So, so the first thing you have, number 1, is the book introduction. When the child sits down with you to read, you always read that to them out loud. We're giving them a little bit of some background information as to what they're going to read. Then over here on number 2, that is where we can analyze the errors and the strategies that they might use. Guided reading works from a strengths-based perspective, and we want to see, what can they do? Are they rereading? Are they self-correcting? Are they chunking things? Are they not doing anything? Are they just reading and going on? We want to know what they're doing. And then number 3, you have the fluency rubric down here on the bottom. And this is where after we are done marking what they read out loud in the top part in the passage here, we're listening to them read for a little bit and we're gauging their fluency. because, you know, by this time they've kind of gotten into the passage a little bit and they're able to, you know, they're just a little bit more like they're rolling with it. They're going. So while the child is reading, we're marking down in this text part here, whether they're making mistakes, whether they're reading it accurately, what they're saying. And I, especially in the beginning, tended to let them go ahead and read the whole text out loud. That helped me as I was getting to know all of the different passages and knowing what the answers would be. It also helps you to hear their fluency. As you get better and you know the answers, it's really up to you whether you want them to read it out loud or whether you want them to read it silently to themselves after you've done this part. It's an option for either way. So after they're done reading the whole passage, then we flip over to the back side. And when they're reading, we have to think about the fact that during this time, we are just recording what's being said. We're not leading them too much. We're not asking them too many questions to elaborate. We want to kind of keep this like, you know, proctoring the test, so to speak, where during our group time, that's the time we're going to work with them and we're going to guide them and we're going to lead them. When they're doing this testing, we want to see what they can do on their own. So number 4 back here on the retelling rubric, each passage, fiction or nonfiction, has some different scoring criteria in their rubric, which will tell you at what score they're reading. Up here in the directions, it will tell you what to say. For instance, it'll say, tell me about what happened in the book. Tell me more. Or what else happened. You know, you can put that in your own Natalie teacher language. Like, what else do you remember? You know, you don't have to say those words exactly. But you don't want to say like, what happened after she left the locket on the table? You know, you don't want to be specific like that. So you will assess their ability to retell here on using the rubric from 1 to 5. That retelling score is going to come right down over here, and you're going to put a score there. Okay. Then we're going to ask them some comprehension questions. And the questions they'll tell you up here whether it's a vocabulary question or a key details or an inference. Or whether it's a text feature, they're evaluating the text, they're analyzing relationships. It kind of depends on the text, what sort of coding these have here, but it'll tell you what you're asking. It will give you the question, and then it will give you some suggested answers. Now, a student doesn't have to say it in those specific words. If they put it in their own words, but it means the same thing, that's what we want them to do. We're scoring things based on 1 full credit, half correct, or no points. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to add up all of those scores, and I'm going to put it right here on my questions score, and I'm going to then add them together. Okay. Now I have a lot of information about my student, but what does it mean? I'm going to log it down here on my bottom chart. And if you even look at your 2 papers that I had you print out, and you look at the back side of them, you're going to notice that the 2 charts look very different. Each text has its own chart for scoring. And I'll explain a little bit more as we go along. This one, for let's say that the student read here, and let's say that he had 2 errors from the first side. Well, what I like to do up here is I like to circle the 2 errors. That tells me right here that he has 98% in his accuracy. This student got 6 on their comprehension score after I added together the retelling and the comprehension questions. Then I take this just like a multiplication chart and I find out where they meet. I can even record them down here. So where they meet is right here in the gray, but right next to the black. And that's where I want them to be, because this is instructional for this student. Let's say that this student read, they were still had 2 errors on the front. They were 98% accurate, but let's say they got a 9 on their comprehension. That would put them in the white box, which would mean that's independent, and that means it's too easy for them. Well, not too easy. It means that it's independent. They don't need you to do it. So if they don't need you to do it, they can do it on their own. We need to find something a little more difficult. We don't want their score to end up in the black, because that's a frustration level, and that means it's too difficult. So I want them to be as close to the black boxes here as possible without being in the black boxes. If this student were over here, right there where the 8 and the 100 met, I would probably level them again at a higher level, because there's a lot of gray left here to cover. And I want to get them again as close to the black as possible. Okay. So I know you've seen all of those things, but it's just a matter of putting them all together. Now, when you look at the one that I gave that you printed, and the one says Sean and the one says, it doesn't say anything, it's blank. It's going to be Melvin. You're going to notice that the one that is Sean, it has a much wider rubric scoring chart on the back. Can you see that difference?
For Sean, there was only one page. We didn't get the back to
Oh,
it.
you didn't get the back. Sorry, I printed it out. Okay. What you're going to notice, especially in 2nd grade, I can do it without necessarily referring to Sean's, is that you are going to see your accuracy rates go down to 90%. Because at 2nd grade, it's appropriate and they can still be instructional at a 90% accuracy rating. This one is an upper grade rubric, and it just goes down to 95. Once we get to that blue and green box for the 3rd grade, their accuracy needs to be 95% or better. You notice here that this student, had they made 6 errors, that would have automatically been frustration level for them. So it's always a good idea as the student's reading to take a look at the chart on the back, because had my reader been reading this and had she made 7 errors, I would have said, okay, great, sweetie, thank you for reading with me today. We're going to try a different passage on another day. She's already frustration based on her number of errors, and I don't need to continue that test. And that's kind of an important thing for you to know, and also a good time saver. Okay. All right. So then you've learned already that there are some things that are errors, and there are some things that readers do that are not errors. And I've given you a little cheat sheet that says score a reading record that you've printed. And things that are errors are uncorrected words or attempts at words. So for instance, like when I have on there substitutes one word for another. The bush had a lot of fruit instead of saying the tree had a lot of fruit. Substitutions of proper nouns the first time only. So we're going to listen to Melvin read later, and he's going to read about the Galapagos Islands. Galapagos is a hard word to say, even if, you know, the teacher is going to have said it to him in the introduction. If he can't read Galapagos the first time, it's an error. Every other time after that, it's not counted as an error. Proper nouns only. Okay, names. Anything that they might have left out or inserted every single time. I do that. I know when I'm reading out loud, on the way to the beach, and, I'll add in something else. You guys might have done that too. When the word is told to a student, they might come across a difficult word, creatures, and they might not know how to attack that word, and they might look at you for help, And you might tell them that's creatures, that we call that an appeal and a told, and that is an error. If they spell or sound out words and then don't come back and put it all together, like let's say they had the word wind and they said wind, and then went on reading, the wind was blowing hard, that would be wrong. If they said the wind was blowing hard, that would not be an error. Okay. And then contractions that are read as two words or vice versa. So if they said cannot instead of can't, or vice versa. Okay. Things that behaviors that readers often do that are not errors is if they go back and they correct themselves. And we call that a self-correction. We want readers to do that. That is a good thing when they go back and fix it, because it doesn't make sense, it doesn't look right, it doesn't sound right. Appeals that are not told to the reader. So like I'll go back to that word creatures. If the reader says to you, is that word creatures? And you say yes, that's not an error. You didn't tell them. They were just kind of verifying it with you. That's okay. Repetition of previously misread proper nouns. I should put misread there. Immature or dialectical pronunciations, like we might hear ax for ask, or idea for idea, or biscotti in very young students. You guys might see this a little bit where they're, saying some of those kind of funny words, but you know that they know what they're saying. They're just immature in their pronunciations. And then spelling or sounding out a word if pronounced correctly. Okay. Anything on there surprising or new? Natalie?
I don't know where it goes, but I have like 2 or 3 students with it has an ed at the end. It's like I asked it. Like it's good.
Yeah, that would be an error.
Okay, yeah. Okay.
They do lots of funny things like that. They get so excited about their ed endings, they want to pronounce them on the end of everything.
Okay, thank you.
So what we're going to do is we're going to watch the teacher do a reading record with Sean. And you have on Sean's The First Woman Doctor. They will be reading together, and you can notice how what he's saying, it's been marked down for you so that you can kind of compare what's being said with how it's being scored. They will pause and zoom in as Sean reads. Okay, let's go ahead and pull this one up.
Let's take a running record together. For this practice activity, you'll take a
And can you hear the volume? Perfect. Thank you.
running record on Sean as he reads the Level M assessment book, The First Woman Doctor. Before you begin, preview the reading record form and skim the book so you'll be familiar with the text. As you listen to Sean read, record his miscues on the form. Or, if you prefer, you can simply watch Maria's notations appear as she takes the running record.
Today, if a girl wants to become a doctor, she can, but in the 18,000s, life was very different back then. Many people, through girls, should not receive an attraction. Elizabeth Blackwell's parents did not agree. The Blackwells had 9 children, and they believed girls should be treated the same way as boys. They believed in equally for all people. Elizabeth was born in England in 1821. Her father owned a sugar factory. He was a fair man and gave his workers good pay. He made sure they got breaks to rest.
Before we analyze the cues Sean uses, let's listen to Sean read an additional paragraph to see if his fluency improves as he becomes more comfortable with the text.
The slavery in America. At this time, Hannah and Samuel Blackwell believed slavery was wrong, and they worked hard to end it. They even let runaway slaves stay in their home.
Do you notice that Sean is more fluent in this section? Let's review the cues Sean uses. Maria marks 5 errors. However, she decides not to count his first error because the time period, the 1800s, is still a difficult concept for a primary age student. His second error, misreading the word thought, is significant. Here, he uses only visual cues and makes up a word. His substitution of attraction for education shows he uses some visual cues and sentence structure, but misses the meaning. From this point on, he's more successful at employing strategies. Maria also marks SC when he misreads treated but corrects it. His insertion of the word way in the phrase treated the same as boys and his substitution of equally for equality indicate he's using meaning, structure, and visual cues. What problem-solving strategies did you see Sean use? Take a moment to make a few notes below the passage and fill out section 2. Here is how Maria analyzes Sean's reading. She also checks the appropriate boxes to note Sean's strategy use. Now we come to fluency. How would you rate Sean? Look at the rubric. Which description matches his performance? Maria observes that Sean has decent phrasing but makes a few mistakes. She gives his reading a fluency rating of 3. Let's try another running.
Okay, so let's stop there. So that probably looks similar to reading records that you've done in your classes. It's like a whole nother layer. You know how you have the columns on the side under the M and the S and the V. And that is a way of analyzing what mistakes the reader is making, or what, I shouldn't say what mistakes, analyzing what cues they are using to read. Are they just we're putting words there that have to do with meaning, that M is for meaning. So like if they said the bunny instead of the rabbit, those kind of mean the same thing. Like in the context, they mean the same. The S is for structure, and that means it's a verb or it's a noun. And then the V is for visual, like they were talking about where he used the thu, he said, for thought. It looks kind of the same. And that's another layer that we will go into at another time. It's better to get the hang of doing this and then coming back to really analyze those records. It's kind of like a super next level. So did you see how that went when he was reading to the teacher? Okay. And did the markings make sense with the errors and the self-corrections? And then the arrow going back, that's showing that he repeated something that he was reading. Okay, feeling good there? Okay, all right. So now we're going to take the other reading record that you have, and this one is for Melvin, and he's going to read The Animals of the Galapagos Islands. And you notice this one doesn't have any marks on it. So as we're listening to Melvin read, we're going to try and keep up with what's happening and make the corrections. So you might want to put your scoring the reading record handy in case you need some help with the codes. The codes are also up here in the gray box. So if you're forgetting something, you can always look right over here. You might have noticed that on Sean's, she put a hash mark for each word that he read correctly. That's a little easier to do in K and 1 and with some of your early readers in 2nd. But as your kids get more proficient, it gets a little hard to keep up and write down if they make errors or what they're saying that may be off of the text. So don't feel that you have to do that. But as the test person, I definitely always keep my pencil on every word because it's less distracting for the student than if all of a sudden I've got my hand in my lap and then I'm writing like crazy because they know that they've had a little rough patch there. But don't feel you need to actually make those little hash marks. All right, so you ready? Got your pencils ready? You've got your blank animals of the Galapagos Islands. Level R, here we go. Let's see if we can keep up with Melvin. Is the volume okay? Yeah, okay, good.
Record. This time we will listen as Melvin, a 4th grader, reads the Level R passage, Animals of the Galapagos Islands. Before we begin, skim the text card to familiarize yourself with the passage. Then get ready to record his miscues on the corresponding reading record form. Some intermediate students read rapidly, which makes it difficult to keep up. Don't worry about that. Just do your best to record his substitutions, omissions, insertions, and self-corrections. Your goal is not a perfect running record. Your goal is to get an idea of the kind of reader he is.
If you visit the Galapagos Islands in South America, you wouldn't see very many people, but you will see a lot of animals. So, of the creatures that live on the islands aren't found anywhere else in the world. Many of the animals that live there are fearless because they don't have predators to chase after. For the animals of the Galapagos, life is pretty good. One of the most famous animals in the Galapagos is giant tortoise. These tortoises are the biggest in the world, and they can weigh as much as 500 pounds.
Tally Melvin's errors. Did you get 7 errors? It's fine
Let me make that a little bigger so we can see it.
if you missed 1 or 2. Our goal is to look for patterns in his processing. You should notice that Melvin uses meaning.
I'll give you a second to check them out to compare yours. It's sometimes a little bit tricky to hear everything that they say, especially on the video. A little easier in person, but every now and then it's like, oh, I'm not sure what he said there. And I go back to what they said after the previous reader, which is the goal is not necessarily a perfect reading record because it's never going to be perfect, but to be able to really get a glimpse into them is close enough. How many of you got 7 errors? Nope. Okay. Now, 7 errors is a big deal because if you were reading and you looked to the back where his chart was, you would see that 7 errors would make this frustration for him. So you can see she says a couple of errors are not significant. So let's listen as she explains that a little more.
Structure, and visual cues. When you determine his accuracy level, only count the significant errors. Make some notes about the student's errors and strategy use in the box below the running record, and complete sections 2 and 3 on the front side of the form. During an actual reading conference, the student would be reading the rest of the passage silently while you do this. I noted that Melvin often omits little words and drops word endings, but most of his errors don't alter the meaning of the passage. Now it is time to assess his comprehension. Turn the form over and take notes as Melvin retells the text.
Okay, so go ahead and tell me everything you can remember what you read.
I remember that giant tortoises can live up to 150 years old, but I didn't know this because when they are 4 years old, they're still children. And blue-footed booby, when a man wants to get a female woman bird, they dance a funny dance, and the female likes them and shakes their legs and dances with them. And sea lion, there are 50,000 sea lions, and I forgot, but land iguanas and marine iguanas are different because the land iguanas lives on land and the marine iguana lives in water, and they have differences because they live in water and on land.
Melvin recalled some random facts about each animal mentioned in the passage, but he missed the main idea that people like to visit the island to interact with these unique and unusual animals. I gave Melvin a 3 on his retelling. Melvin gives complete answers to all questions except number 2, a key details question.
What do the animals of the Galapagos Islands have in common?
That they all live in South America, and all of them have a big fact, like the tortoise is the biggest tortoise in the world, and the sea lions, they have 50,000 sea lions, and the iguanas, they're different. They talk about the different types of iguanas, and they have a Venn diagram about it.
Okay.
Because Melvin only missed one question, his question score is 4. Therefore, his total comprehension score is 7. We only count significant errors to determine his reading level. His 5 errors and his comprehension score of 7 put this level R text at an instructional level for Melvin. To target his needs, it would be wise to use a range of text with Melvin during guided reading. Some easier texts at level P or Q might help him improve his fluency and attend to more of the visual information. For a lesson with a focus on comprehension, specifically retelling, main idea, and key details, it would be appropriate to use level R or even some S text to challenge his thinking. Completing a reading record gives us a lot of specific, useful information about each student's current instructional level. Our reading record data shows exactly what's needed to encourage, coach, and guide all of our readers toward independence and proficiency so they can meet new challenges at the next level. Now that you've completed these practice running records,
let me get rid of that one. So what did you learn about Melvin as a reader? And feel free to just unmute. And
He struggled with main idea and key facts because he was only able to recall just random facts, but not really what the main story was about.
right, absolutely. Yeah. And this is an upper grade student too. So, I think you can tell that doesn't look probably like your, run of the mill second grader. So we would expect him to do that a little bit better. And so you notice how she gives some prescriptions and she gives some ideas at the end about, just like you said, Natalie, about that would be a next step for him, is really working on that recall. All right, let's continue here and then we'll take some questions. So doing a running record with a student, you've done a couple, you know that it takes you probably 10 minutes per student. So we really want to make the process as efficient as possible. So when you're thinking about your starting point, think about, where am I going to start? Do I know about the reader? Do I have a level I can start in? Should I use my word list, or should I look at Lexile to try and make some connection between them? Having your materials organized in your boxes. Hopefully you've got lots of copies of all of the different record forms, or you keep them, maybe they're kept in staff lounges where people can easily make copies of them, but having them all right there is really important, because there's nothing more frustrating than going, oh, I need an S, but darn, I don't have any S's in my folder. Being familiar with the books, that will come as you do more and more records, so that you will know the intricacies of each story. And then if thinking about the difficulty of the text, that if that student reaches the maximum number of errors or struggles through the comprehension conversation, remember, it's okay to stop that test right there and come back and do a different level on another day. And then fluency is, you guys know this, especially working with second graders, students that are less fluent are going to take a little bit longer to assess than a student who is more fluent. It's like kind of like, a double-edged sword. The more fluent students are going to be reading longer texts so that you make up more time that way, but that your struggling students who are still reading word by word are going to take more time. Right, so let me stop the recording here. You know what?